Welcome back guys to another one of my The Gifted reviews in episode 7 of season 2. Now in the way of Easter eggs, this episode did not really carry all that many of those. Even the background story that was addressed on this episode, the origin of Reeva Payge, that was really not out of the comics. At the very least, and if my memory does serve me well, I do not remember reading anything about an origin story for Reeva Payge in the comics. So if my memory is not really serving me well over here and I did forget something, do remind me and do correct me and do let me know if there's an origin story in the comics for Reeva Payge. But this being mentioned and that being said though, let's start with that. And number 1, Reeva Payge's origin story. Now one of the things that I do love about these kind of origin stories is you're looking at this one character and thinking, okay, he or she are the villains of the season, they are pretty terrible people, but then you get a glimpse at their origin story and you're starting to think, okay, maybe, just maybe, they're not as bad as we thought they were. They start getting humanized in a certain way. Now what this episode did for us when it comes to Reeva Payge is it did start doing that kind of humanization. We start seeing her in a different light. We start realizing she is not all that much of a villain. We also get to realize she's not all that void of emotion as we did think she was. We start realizing that she's capable of a lot of emotions, a spectrum of them, and she is capable of both love and loyalty, and that's what she reflects on this episode. Now this friend that we did watch on this episode, the friend that got killed at the hands of the Purifiers, that's the very same friend that was Easter egged during her conversation with Andy a few episodes ago. And interestingly enough, Reeva was not out for blood, she was not out for violence, but rather was out for working with the community, trying to be more like the underground than anything else. But when you have that kind of conviction, only the death of a loved one at the hands of such a hate group would turn you around, would make you think differently, and decide to be the villain that we think she is. But jumping back to present day, in number 2, Reeva has got many goals out of attacking Creed Financial. So there is the issue of the vault, which I'm going to be discussing in a moment here, but there is also the issue of the propaganda, and it's not the kind of bad propaganda, the lies and all of that, but rather the good kind. Reeva wants everyone to know that the mutants have suffered under the oppression of organizations like Creed Financial. Now once again, you can credit this to the fact that while Reeva is part villain as seen on every single episode since the beginning of the season, there is as well this part of her that's actually fighting for something good, fighting against oppression, fighting against the bad people. In a way here, you could draw a parallel between Reeva Payge and Magneto. You could also draw parallels between her leadership style, her methods, and her plans to those of Magneto. And why not? I mean, he was the leader of the Hellfire Club. She's sort of the leader of the Inner Circle, which is really part of the Hellfire Club. The series as well, when it comes to mutants, has always been about these two factions, the Hellfire Club and the Underground, and the moral code and the attitude of the first is sort of representative of Magneto, and the attitude and moral code of the second is representative of Professor X. But number 3, we are finally getting closer to finding out who Madeline Risman is. Now just to jog your memory, Madeline Risman's name was heard for the very first time on the series on the finale of season 1 when Reed met his mother and she talked about his father's lab assistant. Now back then my first guess was that her name had something to do with Mathew Risman from the comics, and Mathew Risman is a Purifiers leader. Another guess was the woman who in the comics happened to be part of Hydra at some point, part of the Weapon X program at another point, and finally an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. after sort of repenting, that woman being Deborah Risman. A third guess though that did come to mind back when the finale of the first season aired was that Madeline Risman is representative of Madeline Pryor from the comics. Now that was pretty far-fetched back then, I did think so, I did say so, and I'm still thinking the same right now. So pretty much we're left with 1, Mathew Risman, and 2, Deborah Risman, and a lot of people might claim Mathew Risman isn't really a possibility. I mean, the guy's too violent, and Madeline Risman on the series is in fact a researcher, so she kind of fits more with the Deborah Risman persona. So is she Deborah Risman or a variation of her? Well, there are a few possibilities over here. She could actually be Deborah Risman from the comics, the show's version of Deborah Risman, and we could lean more towards that possibility given the nature of her work, her research institute, and all of that stuff. But there is also the possibility that somehow she's going to play that role and be related to Mathew Risman. That way, we see her as Deborah Risman and get our way to meeting Mathew Risman for the very first time on the series. Finally, though, she can still be Mathew Risman in one fun way. What if she's a Jace Turner, someone who suffered or assumes she suffered at the hands of mutants between the time that Otto Strucker last met her and this moment in time? Think about it, that could possibly make her a mashup of the two Rismans, Deborah Risman and Mathew Risman. Let's not forget as well that there were a couple dominant themes on this episode, the first of which was pretty much Reeva Payge's history. And with that kind of origin story, we got to watch Reeva Payge switch from the extreme on one side that was being peaceful to the extreme on the other side that is being extremely violent and is separatist. Number 4, Jace Turner meets Benedict Ryan. Now on the subject of Benedict Ryan, we've heard last week of higher-ups in the Purifiers, and we've met one of them. We finally met the man who's known in the comics to have shown his hatred for mutants on so many pages in the comics, and as a matter of fact was sort of a Purifier hero, funding them all the way through in their efforts against all of mutant kind. Now I've already talked enough about Benedict Ryan on one of my videos a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to go through that again, but I'm going to remind you over here. When they mentioned higher-ups last week, it was higher-ups, as in plural, and we've only seen one of those Purifiers higher-ups on this episode and this episode in specific, so it kind of has a theme to it, and it happens to be as well the only episode since the finale of Season 1 on which we got to hear the name Risman once again. So I'm seriously wondering over here and asking myself this, is the series possibly throwing us hints in the form of breadcrumbs, like the full-on introduction of Benedict Ryan on this episode while bringing back the name Risman and putting it on the table? It might as well be a coincidence, and she's a totally nice person and she's gonna help Reed Strucker and all of that good stuff, but she might as well end up being that Purifier person that infiltrates the underground, knows everything about them, acts like she's helping, actually does do some help along the way, but by the end of the season we end up discovering that she's not really with them, she's not really working for them, but rather working against them, trying to make sure she infiltrates the underground in order to take them completely down. Feel free though to discuss this in the comments, because once I opened up this kind of scenario on Discord, there were a lot of awesome comments and a lot of awesome possibilities. So yeah, put it out there. Number 5, and I'm just gonna run through this real quick because I've already discussed it on last week's review, but I do think that Esme is possibly going towards a redemption arc. Possibly, not definitely, but possibly. I know that there are all the anti-arguments, you know, she did a lot of bad shit on Season 1 and that does not promise of a redemption arc. But the whole concept of redemption is someone does something really bad and then they end up redeeming themselves. That's what redemption means. And Esme, since the beginning of the season, has had this changed attitude, a change of heart in a manner of speaking, or at least that's what we're seeing on the series. There is as well this connection that she's building with Dawn, Lorna's daughter, and you need to remember that Lorna did ask her not to get into her daughter's mind anymore, and that is exactly what she did on this episode. I mean, think about it, she respected the privacy of the little baby over there, when her powers are actually based on invasion of privacy. And while seemingly excited, you know, for the victory of the inner circle on this episode, in their quest on this episode, she was even more excited for putting the baby to sleep. It kind of makes you think, what is this character going for? What is the end game for her? Number 6, we now know that Rebecca is going to be a problem for the inner circle. We know that she's an evil animal. We also know that by doing what she did close to the very end of the episode, by killing Quinn in the process, she has made Reeva an enemy of hers. And Reeva is not void of emotion, and Reeva did seem to have loved Quinn or had some kind of feeling for him, and she's not going to let this one go. Even Andy, the guy who's falling for her, the expression on his face at that moment, he did not like that in the least bit. So yeah, Rebecca is gonna be a problem, Twist is gonna be a threat to the inner circle, and she is probably, like I mentioned last week, gonna be a threat to Andy. Number 7, I'm gonna use the best word that's been used on Discord so far after the airing of this episode to describe that entire vault situation. It was extremely anticlimactic. I mean, you would have thought there's a weapon in there or there's a person in there. Preferably a person though, because that's why you wouldn't want to use Andy to kind of crash into that vault. But it was just a computer, Quinn logs in, money is transferred, the inner circle is richer, and Creed Financial is poorer, and so is every investor or client of Creed Financial. But anyway, in terms of Easter eggs, number 7, we got the mention of the Fenris twins and their use of their combined ability. Number 8, now this one is the first in a series of Easter eggs that Hillbilly Author kinda helped me spot on this episode. And all of these, this one and the ones that follow, have something to do with the computer screens on this episode. For one thing, we've got the Morpheus software setup log, which possibly hints towards Morpheus, the character introduced on the pages of the Moon Knight comics. We've also got number 9, Prism, which could be a hint or Easter egg or a reference to Prism in the comics, the member of the Marauders and one of Mr. Sinister's assassins. But finally though, there is number 10, Taskman, which could possibly be a reference to Taskmaster from the comics. So that being said, my work here is done, got nothing more to say. If there are any Easter eggs that I've missed, make sure you mention them in the comments. Otherwise, let me know what you liked about this episode. What do you think is going to go down going forward? Let me know as well if you did like this video by dropping it a much appreciated like. And if that were to be the case, make sure you subscribe and enable notifications for my future videos, community posts, and live streams. But until the next time you tune in for another one of my videos though, thank you so much for tuning in, and have a great day.